Wow, I need to work on the lighting. I'm way too light. I look like I'm bleached out. Okay, I'm hoping you can hear me. So anyway, I will just pretend you can hear me because I'm not seeing. Oh, there I am. Okay, I can see now that I'm being heard. All right. So how are you guys? This is not planned out very well. In other words, not in advance. So I just thought I was going to give you some thoughts. I was talking to a friend that I met from Twitter yesterday evening about feminism and what it's like to be a male dating uh, women in today's world. And anyway, so I'm just going to give you some of my thoughts about uh, feminism. And I grew up in the 1960s. I was a very, very small child in the 1960s. And I got to be there seeing a little bit of the second wave feminism. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm disheveled right now. I just got a phone call a second ago and I was running around trying to get some stuff done. So, anyway, okay. So, I grew up and I just want to give you my experience about what the 60s looked like from a 1 year old. No, unfortunately, it's not a 1 year old, but I will tell you what it was like to have grown up. Okay, now, of course, if you know anything about me, I always have to start a little bit at earlier. So, my opinion is that after World War II, divorce skyrocketed. Now, that's not my opinion. That's actually what is historically true. That went through it. I saw that firsthand. That is my experience of my aunts and uh, people and my grandmother even that had husbands that came home from World War II. See, and I don't know this. I'm guessing because of statistics, but many soldiers had sexually strayed on their wives, had become addicted to pornography overseas, and some of them had returned alcoholics. So within this cloud of heroism, with American victory, underneath the rainbow of God's approval of America, you know, what was unseen in all that cloud was that there was a lot of suffering in the United States families because of uh, because of all the things that had happened in World War II, because everything changed. See, these women fell prey to the idea that divorce would help them start over with a different hero. And so the hero, rather than going to be a wartime hero, their husbands were going to be their heroes now. And so um, they found that not to be true, though. From my experience, most of them learned just to live without a husband. And so the family unit just started to fail right after World War II. Now, I'm going to jump back. The drug infested and wild 1920s, because I had a grandmother that was quite an older mother, and she had been raised in the 1920s. And there was a cultural rebellion back then, and she told me all about it. So that drug infested and wild 1920s culture rebellion and the World War I had created a wound in America, both of those things, but those seem to have healed. Even though they left a scar, they seem to have healed. But the devastating outcome of World War II, I don't believe has ever gone away. The children of World War II became the dupes of vogue European pop philosophy, and they marched to the order of their drug experimenting professors at college. This generation became the foot soldiers of a new war brought to America, the upheaval of Christian values. These men, and I saw them with my own eyes on television, and I had them in my family, but I'm specifically talking about the men in the 1960s on television. There were some very influential elites, we call them now political pundits, who introduced perversions and rebellion into the conservative family home because we didn't know it was, they would have these talks, these debates, they would have these very high sounding discussions with these perverts and with these people that were trying to bring rebellion. And they just thought, oh, well, we just need to discuss this rationally, above board. Let's talk about these ideas. And then we had stuff like the Merv Griffin Show, the Phil Donahue Show, the McLaughlin Group, Firing Line, and other political, and not just those, because not all of them are political, but other political Sunday morning shows that these opened a way through the years later for shows like Jerry Springer and that trash television. Okay, so now we're going to bring it into my life, more personal. My first shock as a child combined both feminism and the 1960s was at a wedding. My family attended this wedding where the bride wore a miniskirt and white go-go boots. And for some reason, I was a very petite child. I was eye level to her hemline, and it felt scandalous. And I thought, as a small child, that it was very ugly what she was wearing. It wasn't like the pretty bride's dresses that I colored, and there were paper dolls back then, and you'd put these beautiful bride's dresses on paper dolls. And so when I saw this woman dressed like that, I was very keenly embarrassed for her. And that's why I remember it so vividly. I knew something at that moment was terribly wrong with our culture. And I also remember, again, very vividly, laying on the floor and coloring in a new coloring book someone had just given me. And instead of these glamorous women clothes, the 1940s glamorous and 30s beautiful clothes that I got to color, all of a sudden somebody had slipped in, and I don't know if it was my birthday or whatever, but now in front of my 5-year-old eyes were career women. Now I was supposed to enjoy coloring female doctors in lab coats and scientists and stewardesses, and I was very disturbed. I wanted my old coloring book back, but I went along with it because my mother laid next to me. I'll never forget this. My mother laid next to me, and she helped me color in this new coloring book with me. So those were my first memories of feminism imposing itself upon my happy childhood and trying to twist my brain. I have a faint memory of going shopping with my great aunt, who was, back then, they would wear high heels and a hat and gloves. And so it was a very different world. See, I got to see the hangovers, in Dallas, because I lived in Dallas, and I got to see the last remnants of that, because Dallas was a little bit less progressive than other places in the North. So they clung to these old traditions. And I believe not only it was a different world, but I believe it was a much better world. Everyone dressed so nicely, and people seemed much happier than they are now, much happier. And they had so many horrible things going on in their lives, and yet they seem to have more. I don't know. I can't tell you why, but I just feel like they were much happier. Now, that was the early 1960s. So even if the US was churning out a workforce meant to serve the big business masters, and that's really what was happening, jobs were secure in my environment, and that allowed married women to stay at home and raise families. And big families were not too rare, even among Protestants. So as a child, I wasn't sure how to think about this very radical transition that I witnessed going on. And I certainly couldn't express it in words. But I can tell you I was very worried and sad about it. Something just wasn't right. I saw this as a harsh, unkind, frenzied, and wrong. I knew it was a morally wrong takeover of America. I hated, as I got older, I hated that well-presented men, like the ones I saw in the movies, like Cary Grant and Rock Hudson, turned into these messy, stringy-haired men with hippies, and they would have a lot of them would have these bushes on, and they would have nothing was clean cut about them. It was always looked dirty. And then I remember Laugh-In, the show Laugh-In. I came in one night when I was supposed to be in bed or something, and I saw it, and I hated that adults would act so stupid in television shows. I mean, there were moments that were funny, um, but mostly I didn't like that these were grown adults acting stupid. And I was more of a fan of I Love Lucy, even though she acted silly. She still acted like an adult, but and I liked Leave It to Beaver and stuff like that. So that was what I wanted to watch. And in that time frame, little girls were told they could be both a mother and have a career. And that's when I was in elementary school. And when people would come up and ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? A stay-home mom was an acceptable answer at that time. So I believe that as I grew up, history was being rewritten on television for a new generation. So we were shown on television that we were the first. I'm sure the first generation that were just stuck in front of the TV because a lot of people we couldn't go out. We didn't have big yards and stuff like that. And I know my dad had television, but it was very different. In the 1960s, this was the first generation widely that just grew up on watching television. And we were shown that it was okay to laugh and disrespect our parents because, see, they showed all this disrespect towards parents, but especially fathers. And everybody just laughed. And so we were thinking, oh, this is horrible, but I guess we can laugh at it. And the television, if you've ever seen Happy Days, our parents told us that it was a very good period. People acted morally. See, my parents were not pro-hippie, even though they were the same age. A lot of people their age were the hippies. They got married really early, and so they had to grow up and take care of a family. So they really were not hippies. But they were blindsided by it. They weren't absolutely sure that it was horrible. They were just kind of swept away with it without saying anything. They were just busy with their own lives. And so they didn't understand how really dangerous it was. But at that time, my parents said that the 50s, they were lamenting, oh, all this new sexual revolution. Oh, let's go back to the 50s where all the girls were pure. And Happy Days was rewriting that into our minds like, oh no, mom and dad, right. The 50s were just as wild as now, and everybody was giving up their virginity in the backseat of a car in a drive-in movie. So anyway, I can't tell you if it was true. I'm just telling you what I was told by my parents, and I believe my parents were probably closer to the truth than the writers of Happy Days. But at that point, sexual freedom and gender equality became the ultimate freedom, even more so than racial freedom. This seemed it seemed like just a small moral trajectory shift, but it ended up in no-fault divorce, abortion, same-sex marriage equality, the alphabet soup on the right, and gender changes today. It just was this little tiny, just a tiny trajectory shift that people always know. This is such a little thing. Oh, we can accept just this little thing, but it's never just a little thing. Next, we're going to see pedophilia and bestiality. And that's going to be the norm. It's going to. If we don't all stand firmly against this wave of depravity, every single one of us needs to stand against it. Okay. And just a side note, and this is my opinion about climate change. The Bible speaks about the inevitability of climate change due to the Earth's morality. And it's soaking up the blood of innocent human life. That's what it says in the Bible, that the earth is going to revolt against man's immorality and the death of innocence. So when you hear that climate change is human derived, that is absolutely true. But I would absolutely blame abortion and sex trafficking for children and abuse in that way as what is causing the earth to revolt against humans. It's not fossil fuels. See, the devil sees this happening. He sees what's happening and he says, okay, let's direct their attention over here. Look, it's fossil fuels. So anyway, so I'm going to jump forward to 1972. And I am woman, hear me roar. I can hear the song in my head. It topped the charts. Feminism's mantra. I am woman, hear me roar, and numbers too big to ignore, and I know too much to go back and pretend, 'cause I've heard it all before, and I've been down there on the floor, and no one's ever, sorry, I'm hoarse today, and no one's ever gonna keep me down again. She says, oh yes, as a feminist, I'm wise, but it's wisdom born of pain. Yes, I paid the price, but look how much I gained. Well, we have gained a lot of weight. And she sings, Helen Reddy is who sang it. If I have to, I can do anything. Oh, sorry. I am strong. I am invincible. I am woman. Anyway, that was so sorry, but you had to hear the lyrics of what we were fed into our little brains. And it's really interesting because the third verse of that song says, I am still an embryo with a long, long way to go until I make my brother understand. Okay, that was 1972. What happened in 1973? Roe versus Wade. So that is kind of interesting. In 73 was the Roe versus Wade Supreme Court decision, and abortion rights were made legal for everyone, and even sometimes up to birth, depending on the state and the situation. That feminism that sang I Am Woman was the feminist that pushed abortion rights, and a hard kickback was given on their female unborn because of that. Then in about 6th or 7th grade, I can hear a thunderstorm coming, so if we're cut off, I'm sorry. Adults in my circle began to discuss divorce in front of us and how, poor women, it was so sad that poor women were abandoned without any means of financial support, because of this no fault of divorce. Now, women couldn't sue like they used to for a child support. Girls must be taught to go to college and earn a degree so that you can take care of yourself as a backup just in case your husband can't take care of you. Girls need to now be practical and smart. The indoctrination was full swing on television. Every commercial, every new nightly show. I remember Maude. There was a woman. Maude was about this woman who was older, and she was a super liberal. And it's interesting because I did an interview with producer Rod Parker, who was the producer of Maude, and he said this group, the Zero Population Growth, announced that they were going to give a $10,000 prize for comedies that had worked in something to do with controlling population into the show. And so they wrote into the show that the 47-year-old Maude would get pregnant and then have an abortion. Now, all the other programs that were very into having this on their program just spoke about birth control or vasectomies. But Parker bragged that they went to the most controversial route, which was just speaking about abortion in public. And I remember the Mary Tyler Moore Show did an episode where Mary explained the need for population control on the news with Ted Baxter. And then there were television shows like Alex, Laverne and Shirley, Charlie's Angels, Three's Company. See, all these very successful shows push the idea of the career woman being so happy and free and getting to do what they wanted to do, not being tied down with a husband or children. And I'm going to tell you, what I saw at that time was that everyone loved it. All of this newfound idea of freedom, it seemed like the bright and glorious progress of the human spirit. And now there were a few voices out there that spoke against it. And the truth is, those who lived as adults during that time, like my parents, who were not hippies themselves, never spoke of the evil of it. And most people will not speak of the evil of that time that lived as adults through it. I mean, I have found that you might as well be speaking to a wall when you express the horror of the hippie generation. Lots of Catholics and Protestants who were born before 1950 will believe that while the movement was abused, the main spirit of the age was wonderful. They're still unable to open their eyes because they never had to experience the fruit of the moment and of what they believed in, what they pushed. They, to this day, it just drives me crazy because they won't admit they were wrong. This was a horrible thing they introduced to the world. I'm being tempted right now to well, anyway, Vatican II. Anyway, even the conservative anti-feminist Phyllis Schlafly was a Catholic, one of the few voices out there. She didn't really even get it. How can we say about her that she legitimately spoke for the homemaker when she was a top lawyer with 6 kids and was rarely home? You know, well, okay, so sometime in my youth, this idea of getting married young fell out of favor. Women were encouraged to wait till they got through schooling. And divorce, I'm sure, played a role in that as well. Things got so radically changed that by the time I was in college, the indoctrination was complete. Even among Christians, a version of feminism was accepted. There was almost no one to speak out against it. The idea of being a stay-at-home mother was then considered ridiculous. I talk to people all the time about it, and I was ridiculed. I was considered immature. Women that talked about, why did you go to college? You're being irresponsible. You're going to waste your life. Literally, those words were said to me by one of my favorite professors. Then women would say, you're betraying your feminist mothers who supposedly fought so hard for their daughters to be able to have a career. I think about Mary Poppins, who came in to take care of these poor children who were being ignored because their mother was a feminist and she was going around pushing for the women's vote. But anyway, okay. And I know all this as a fact because I was there. And I was the lone female voice that I was aware of in my group. And I had a pretty large group. But I was the lone female still willing to state out loud that I wanted to be a mother first and foremost. But was finishing up college, just in case my husband, and I was thinking, my husband might hurt himself or he may go off to war or whatever. Because the fact is I wanted 8 children. And if I said anything like that, people laughed at me. It was a laughable number to anyone who heard it, because back then having 4 was considered a very large family. Now, I do think there were a lot of young women who felt as I did, but they didn't dare say it out loud. I believe that not because they told me, but because they had this quiet terror on their face when, when I would bring the subject up. And see, most feminists would not be silent. They would mock me. And so the girls that were sitting there going, they was the ones that kind of agreed with me. And I tell you, I grew up with a very dislike for my gender, because I considered them very illogical, incredibly duped and manipulated by the culture. Can you hear all that lightning and thunder? Okay. Yes, I did speak up that much. And I was 100,000,000 to 1. In fact, I was told regularly that no man would want to marry a woman who couldn't financially support herself. Men wanted strong women who could bring home the bacon, fry it up in a pan. Never, never, never let you forget you're a man. See, I can't talk. I've still got this. I'm a woman. It was a commercial. Believe me, women my age will remember it. I don't know how many other women my age were able to comprehend the horrors of second wave feminism when they experienced it so up close as I did. I felt like the sole child in the emperor's, that story of the emperor's new clothes. I was the one that was going, wait, stop. You are naked. No one, not even the men of that age, protested. The young men loved the new sexual freedom of the contraceptive age. And the few squares, that's what they called uncool, the squares of the older generation, those religious squares, where, okay, we might call them, they were shadow banned, but they were silenced. And this new world of equality for women has caused 3 generations of women to fall prey to its deception and lies. At least 3 generations of women suffer so much because of their own stupidity, and the men haven't stepped up to save these women in distress because they were pumped full of pride. Well, the women were pumped full of pride, and everybody believed that this was supposed to empower women. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to get out of live, and I'm just going to check and make sure. It looks like I'm just going to check for a couple things, and then I'm going to come back on live, and I'm going to read you the last part of this. It'll be part 2 of this, but it'll be a few minutes before I get to it. God bless. Thank you for listening. And if you hated what I said, I'm sorry. That's just my experience.